All right, folks, welcome back. Happy New Year. Our first episode of the Unplanned Show here in 2024. Just kind of wild to think about. Super excited to have my guest on today, Manu Gurudatha. Say hello, Manu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Manu Gurudatha.
We're going to be digging into sort of a story that Manu has had a little bit on the conference circuit recently, where the title was "From Slipping to Shipping," which I love. There's a little bit of wordplay in there, and so we're going to be getting into that. Just quick heads up on update, upcoming shows. We will not have a show next week for MLK weekend. But then we will be back with Nora Jones, who is kind of has been a really big player in the incident response, chaos engineering space, and recently joined PagerDuty through the acquisition of a company she founded called Jelly. So really excited to have her on the show. And keep in mind that you can always catch the audio replays. We've been posting those on Spotify, also available on Apple Podcasts. So you can catch up on the Unplanned Show, walking your dog, doing the dishes, whatever you like to do. Great way to kind of keep up with past episodes. So without further ado, Manu, tell us a little bit about the genesis of this talk that you gave at a conference recently, and kind of what was it about? What was the sort of key point for folks to take away from it?
Yeah, so first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. And Dormain, thank you for having me on the Unplanned Show. So a little bit of context for the talk that you're referring to, Dormain, is, once I started leading the incident response group, which we now call ourselves as incident management. So there was it's the core group of PagerDuty, and it has a lot of complexity, and it has a lot of different elements to it. Like, for example, the code base has been there from day one of PagerDuty. So you can actually think of technology shifts, product shifts, business shifts that has happened since then, and we have been able to evolve the system to what it is today and continuously innovate on that. And I think this is something that many people across the industry can relate to, because you start with a scrappy idea, execute on it, find the right product market fit, but then you start growing into the business, growing the business into new areas, and you constantly have to take on all of the previous thinking and evolve that into new product market fit and all of that stuff. So this is a very common topic, a common problem, a common situation that it was not just we were facing, but also across the board, many people can relate to. So to tell a little bit about where we started off from was, historically, we were also very distributed and very, our teams were autonomous, in terms of like planning, execution, and all of that stuff. But it had also resulted in a lot of complexity and a lot of the things that is falling through the cracks, which ended up resulting in small features taking longer, or there's too many features on teams backlogs, or when you want to actually make a big shift in the product direction, it would be very, very hard because of so many dimensions to take care of. So that was the situation we stepped in, and one of the through the next 2 years of consistent change and bringing some standardized processes and just like how to think about a high agility product of while maintaining the trust of our customers. Those sometimes seem like a contradicting goal. Like, it's like, how do you find speed, cost, and time, right? It's like, yeah, you can take something and go fast, but then how do you maintain the cost or keep the cost down? Or how do you go fast but at the same time not drop on quality? So it's something like that we had to consistently take and chip away in terms of how we structure ourselves, what are the frameworks we bring in, how do we prioritize things, how do we plan for tech debt versus product features, and many of those things. So with that, we use a simple structure called status reports, which basically every project is written as what is the objective and what is the date in which we want to ship that, and we track those. As every time we miss those, we actually track them through a strike through. And typical project 2.5 years ago used to have like 3 lines of strike through dates. So our first goal was to actually bring predictability into the system. Like, we set the goal for all net new projects, make sure that you take all the things into consideration and let us not slip on the date. And that's really where the slip came from.
Yeah.
So how do we take these slippages and start shipping consistently? That was one of the more abstract goals that we set out a couple of years back. And the teams really stepped up in taking this as a challenge, and we were able to consistently make progress towards that. So the first level in that is hitting predictability, then getting efficient at it, then getting more mature into that. So that is the journey we have been on, which I presented in the previous talk, which many people were able to resonate with. So yeah, that's the context.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, and I love it, this coming up at this time of year. I think lots of folks are in that planning mode, a little bit of reflection back on last year and how we're going to do things better this year. But what you're touching on is also, I think, this phenomenon that does kind of go a little bit undetected, which is, there is the legacy world of, it was long-lived legacy code, and folks thinking about that, in banks and insurance companies and whatnot. And okay, sure, that's going to be really painful. But forgetting that, code is basically tech debt, like the second you've shipped it, right? It's, today's code is tomorrow's tech debt.
Mhm.
And even a company that's essentially been able to be born, you described a lot of the benefits of like that distributed microservices architecture and a lot of autonomy of different teams, but that also has, like, where does that go, right? It can liberate you from certain types of challenges with huge monoliths that you can't make changes to, but it introduces a different set of challenges. And so I think, like, what you're getting at is, like, doesn't matter if you're a legacy company or you're a tech startup, mastering these skills of how do you manage as your teams grow, as your product has to evolve. And of course, technology is changing around you constantly, in ways that you can't predict or anticipate. How are you going to be responsive?
Right.
And so, you mentioned, like, the first goal was establishing predictability. And I mean, which seems like, wow, that's a big first goal. So what's the, tell us a little bit more about, like, what's the journey towards getting to better predictability in terms of what does that mean? What did that look like, right? Going from, hey, instead of like the strike throughs on the status reports piling up, what is, which is clearly not, something isn't being predicted well.
Mhm.
What does it look like, right, when you reach that first goal?
Right. I think, I wanted to just comment on a couple of things that you mentioned, which is today's code is tomorrow's tech debt. That's a very apt statement because software decays. And that's a very real thing, right? So, so, so going back to the status reports and how do we build predictability in? So one of the first things we did was go back and take a look at it from a first principles angle, which is, for a B2B enterprise SaaS company like ours, what are some of the key requirements, structural elements, or tooling and other things that is required for us to be able to run fast? Because running fast, having that sense of urgency, being able to adapt to change, these are all some of the core goals that we have, because change is constant and change always happens. So we want to be able to adapt to doing that, but we also want to carry 14, 15 year old code base into future, into whatever else is coming in future, right? So for that, when we took a first principles view of things, like how should the software development life cycle should look like for a company like for a company product like ours, what should the team org structure should look like? Because there were teams with like 3 people, and they were trying their best to actually run. But think about it, a 3-person team with one person dedicated to like on call and handling some of the sustainability efforts, and another person goes on PTO, you have a team of one who is actually running your projects. And that either, even if they're doing heroism to actually take it forward, they'll either be ending up in burnout and they'll eventually quit, or you don't have enough, you will not be able to like meet the predictability goals that you have set. So thinking, that's just one example of where teams themselves might not be staffed properly. It could also vary from skill set required and experience and all of that stuff. So when we looked at it this way, there was some obvious changes that we wanted to make in terms of, first, like when you think about when the giving deadlines or giving timelines on when a project needs to be shipped, let's actually go back and think through. First of all, do you have all the product requirements really Marty King talks about four aspects of definition of ready. It's like viability, feasibility, and things like that. Have we done those? Have we validated with our customers that if we build this is a good idea, that they'll adopt and use it? Because if you end up building the wrong thing, that will actually be wasted effort. It's again this whole shift left mentality, right? If you catch a bug after you have shipped, it's a very costly bug. But if you build the wrong thing in the first place, that's even more costlier, because you're now carrying tech debt. You're now carrying shipping code that you have to maintain for a really long time and then change it and things like that. So understanding all of this and getting our teams in a structurally good place was step one. And then finding out where the investments needs to be done, because some areas were underfunded, because we were trying to do too many things. So the second part was to say no to a lot of things, which is we will only focus on fewer things and do them really well so that we can move forward. Which means in a resource constrained environment, something else has to drop. And identifying those were some of the hard decisions that we had to make. And then just using one of the other core principles of build for evolution and not for perfection is another cultural shift that we had to go through. Because there is, in the spectrum of, in the older days of shrink wrap software, the quality of a product is basically out of your hands the moment the moment the release is done.
Right.
Versus now we are a lot more fault tolerant. We can even, our whole business actually relies on fault recovery as quickly as possible and things like that. So not using this to our advantage to like lower the quality bar, because that's the wrong conclusion to draw. But using this as an advantage for us to complete the feedback loop from the customer is critically important. Because many times ideas come as hypothesis, but then you have to implement that and then actually ship it to get the feedback from the customers. And typically they are, it's like a Venn diagram where they, fit mostly well, but then you'll also learn a lot of things that, oh yeah, customers' jobs to be done are slightly different than what we thought. And here is a newer way, better way, and opportunity that we can evolve the product into. This is why actually having the architectural mindset to build for evolution and not for perfection is actually critically important, because we know things are going to change. We know that it has to change. Even if we hit the requirements absolutely clearly right now, it is going to change, right? So thinking about what are our type 1 and type 2 decisions architecturally and really optimizing those ahead of time, these are all some of the things that we baked into our SDLC itself. So, and then comes really like, when you execute, having the definition of done. Do you have all the quality metrics? Do you have the right metrics that you're measuring? Uh, and things like that. That gives a little more of tooling for each of the teams to be able to manage themselves independently.
Okay. So there are a lot of great frameworks that you described in terms of, overall, just, yeah, how do you march things along to the point where you're doing fewer things better, more predictably, and doing them in a way that you're building for evolution, not perfection. Love that quote. Um, are, tell me more about, like, does the team, how did the teams make this adjustment? Were these all happening kind of simultaneously, or was there sort of first like, hey, let's scrub the org, and in order to do that, you've got to understand, what are you saying no to? Because if you're going to say, listen, we're going to take these three person teams and combine them into a single 2-pizza team, which means that 2 of those things aren't going to happen anymore.
Right.
Right? Like, do you have to kind of do that audit first?
Yeah. So there are many ways to slice this. So yeah, a couple of things that we have adopted that has really worked very well for us is, one is working backwards philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So first figuring out, like, whenever we take on a big initiative project or anything like that, right? So the our ambition is pretty huge. We really want to achieve a lot of things, but then when you really map it out with the realities of time and resources, there's only few things that you can accomplish. So but still having that longer term view of where you want to go is actually critically important, because then when you think about it, then you can actually work backwards from and say, here are the areas that I am okay making trade-offs. I'm okay taking shortcuts, or I'm okay like not having building this at all in the first milestone or second milestone or so on. So that helps you to, again, going back to type 1 and type 2, like you can really nail down the basics with type 1 and actually start shipping that. And that helps you to evolve into whatever else changes that comes later on, because fundamentally your direction has not changed. What the changes comes later on is more superficial, or more kind of like the last mile functionality, but it would not fundamentally change the way you operate things.
Yeah.
I think taking that kind of an approach into many of the bigger initiatives that we take on, I think that really has helped us to continuously move forward. And we also take the point of view that assume that if you plan for a quarter, assume that your second quarter plans will change. So at the end of each quarter, you need to ship something of value so that customers can keep using it and things like that. A big project might take 3, 4, 6 quarters for all we know, right? But still do that incrementally and ship them in ways that we can actually learn from them and continuously evolve. So these are like some of the tricks that we kind of use to build that mindset of evolution.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think something that, coming back to one of your first points about how to find this almost like diametrically opposed balance between agility and customer trust.
Yeah.
And, the other thing, having done a lot, with teams who've been working to adopt Agile, is it can sort of put your eyes right in front of your feet in terms of just what is the next step, this foot in front of the other. But if you don't have that vision of where you're going, like that next foot in front of the other can lead you like down some very strange paths.
Exactly.
That, sure, it made sense as the next best thing right then, which, by the way, is one of my favorite songs from Frozen 2. If you recall, when
Ask my daughter for that.
when Anna's stuck somewhere out there.
Yes.
Although Lost in the Woods is pretty special also, Christoph's song as well. Um, I didn't just spend a lot of time with Disney. I promise. No, I did. Um,
Let it go is the one phrase I know from. I don't
well,
know.
yeah, but that's Frozen 1,
Okay.
right? Like, everyone kind of knows that one. Like, really, you want to get hardcore, you got to go to Frozen 2 and
Right.
start, breaking down each of those songs, because I do love talking about psychological safety and closing the gates of Arendelle. It's a really great analogy there. Um, but anyways, the next, what is the next best thing in that agile approach without that vision of where you're going? Like, you can walk down some strange paths that you're then going to have to figure out how you have to walk back out of. So that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
I
Sorry.
use this analogy sometimes to kind of explain people because it's like, I live in Bay Area, and if you're to go from San Francisco to LA, directionally, you need to head, in the south direction for about
Mhm.
hours or whatever if you're driving. But then, you might take a lot of detours and like actually go in the opposite direction for a short amount of time because you want to catch the I-5 or whatever, right? Like I think trying to optimize as a whole in that kind of a context is where it is actually okay to take detours or even go in the wrong direction, what is perceived as the wrong direction, because you're trying to like optimize for that bigger broader goal, as opposed to just like constantly look at oh, I should be going south, I should be going south, and you might actually be stuck in surface street for a long time. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, kind of coming back to your other point, that was about how figuring out where to say no and identifying what to drop being like the hardest part, which, that's where that sunk cost fallacy really comes into play. And I'm sure, probably half a dozen cognitive biases to go along with it for all those teams, and how you have to have a conversation with them. But if you don't have a picture of like, we are trying to get here, to put in front of people,
mhm.
to help explain to them why we're going to pull back from whatever they've been working on, it it is super hard for the human psyche to kind of be okay with letting go, let it go. I didn't even plan that one, Manu. It's like, it's just it's just flowing so naturally.
Exactly.
It's not frozen at all. It's just like water.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. Oh,
so
we are in different territory now.
um, yeah, and we just got to work Sven and Olaf in here, and we're gonna have the whole cast. It's gonna be great. Uh, so and now I'm thinking about slipping to shipping and like all the aquatic whatever, ice skates, slip. Never mind. Just stop it, Dormain. Um, so assets, like talking about like, hey, you've got some areas that are underfunded. You've got to say no. That's the hardest part. But I love that idea of like, hey, you got to start with the vision. You can't start cutting things and building that predictability if you don't know where you're going first. So I think that what I'm taking away is like, you got to start with that vision of where you're going,
Right.
so that you can start to rein in your refocus and organize your resources on what you do need to do. What else is, like, in terms of just, those sound like a lot of difficult conversations, but what then, what are you putting people onto in terms of like, are there changes in how folks are planning? You mentioned, hey, you've got to be able to ship something of value this quarter, next quarter might change. Um, so tell me a little bit more about, how does once you've kind of reoriented teams around, we've got this new vision, we're going to change course on a few areas, double down in certain other areas. Now what? Now what are the expectations that folks have? And is this the point where you start to see that predictability, or what?
Yeah. So there's also, one of the things that makes us great and makes us want to come to work every day is that we work with great people, right? I think people also keeping them engaged and keeping them energized about what they need to work on next is also critically important. And I'm trying to bring that as a point here because setting the vision is one part, then is essentially making sure we lead them and we basically provide and we set them up for success, right? So defining what success would look like constantly is a key part of our jobs essentially. So so once we set up the frameworks on, here is the vision, here is a single source of truth, here is how our operational model works, all the way from annual plans to quarterly plans to, like weekly check-ins or weekly, we have something called as a program core team where cross-functionally all the leaders come together to literally go over every line and see whether it is, it's a traffic light system where is it on track, is it behind, do they need help, and things like that, so that we can constantly help them out. Those are all like the execution focused structures and metrics. Now the next set of once we build that muscle of execution within our org, which is critical, which is almost like quintessential for any company to keep moving forward, but that alone is not enough. Now you want them to up level them, raise the bar, and essentially help them grow. This is really some parts of growth mindset. You talked about psychological safety, which basically translates into people asking the hard questions and essentially us really be able to like have those crucial conversations so that the best ideas can come forward and we can actually work on those things, because good ideas, great ideas can come from anywhere, and we need to have the environment where those things comes to the surface and we act upon that. So I'm putting a bunch of these things into the next bucket of evolution because one is predictability, that we can bring it to through structures and some of the other things we talked about. The next part would be to essentially grow them and elevate them. And that's the part where a lot of the decisions needs to be pushed down to the teams and individuals, where they are now empowered to make decisions. They're able to run fast, because there is the old adage, right? It's like, if you want to run fast, go alone. If you want to go run far, go together.
Right.
It's true, but then we are trying to go far and fast, right? So how do you do that? So that is really where autonomy and alignment really needs to go together. Uh, where I would even say that like alignment is even more important than autonomy, where first we align that here is the direction, here is what we are all trying to go towards, and then we can actually be autonomous individually to go and execute. So I think that's kind of what the next aspect that we worked on, where we essentially build the empowered individuals, empowered teams to run fast, set their own targets, as long as they are tied to the bigger vision that we had, not just in terms of how much or how we execute, but are also on the what are the things that we execute. Because some teams had a lot of tech debt, and the first things that they had to do was just spend a year actually upgrading their whole tech stack while shipping features. Whereas some other teams or some other product areas were very much focused on increasing the scale, because we had more customers and things like that. So it depends on each team, individuals, and so on. So with predictability kind of established, next was essentially growth, innovation, and then from then onwards, operational maturity. Like how can we do things the fastest, the most efficient, and so that we give maximum time that we have towards innovation, which is really where fun lies.
Okay. Um, sorry, just taking some notes. Okay. It's interesting. There's almost this like full circle. That's a, whatever, there and back again. That's a different reference altogether. But you started by talking about how the teams had been working in a very autonomous way, very distributed and autonomous. And how that had led to a lot of complexity and features taking longer and the inability to do big shifts in product direction. And it's what I'm hearing though is that you kind of get back to this point where secondary to that alignment around that big vision, you want to get back to that level of autonomy. Like it's still critical for autonomy to be something that is supported and sort of sought after.
Yes.
Just without that alignment, it can kind of turn into a sprawling chaos. But once you have that alignment, that is the next thing, right? Is that you've got to figure out how do you push down those decisions and give that autonomy.
Yep.
And so, and you described some of those like different layers of like the operational plan and model, like the key sort of muscle group of the annual plan, quarterly plan, and then I don't know, monthly and weekly or whatever. Are those kind of those alignment points where, hey, they can make a lot of decisions on their own, but those are those check-in points where they're able to kind of ensure that no one's like lost the script completely on the bigger vision or what this is supporting. Is that fair?
That is fair with a couple of nuances.
Okay.
I think from an execution standpoint, the teams still do have full authority over what decisions they make and things like that, because they are the best people who are closest to the code, who are closest to the product, who understands what the trade-offs are. But setting the context of what is important as a business, as a product is my job, is our job as leaders. So with that, also the alignment comes into the factor of we take the annual V2M, which is our metric for annual plans. We break it down to quarterly targets, which is a little more fine-grained and more detailed. But still, we also want to do that from a planning perspective, not from an execution perspective, because we still are continuously, we are still a CD. We are still delivering value consistently. We are not looking at quarterly releases or anything like that. But from a weekly check-in point of view, that we're not constantly looking at, hey, are you aligned with the thing? Because that essentially comes from the quarterly planning. It's more about execution and blocking. So I think, yeah. So because there is an overhead cost to constantly checking, like, hey, are we doing the right thing? That imposes a lot of cognitive overload,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So doing that once a quarter to make sure everyone is really aligned that, hey, in the next quarter, here are the major projects that we're going to be running on. And then each team fan out, and then you start executing towards that. And now there might be still one more question, like, how does an engineer influence the roadmap? How do they actually say, hey, this is something important? And that's really where planning is the vehicle where new changes can be brought in. If folks are interested in, or they think that there is some critical area that they can invest or we can invest, then that is the area through which they can influence what the group's plan is for either the quarter or for the year and so on. And that really involves a little more thought process, because you now need to understand what is the business value, how much does it take, what are the trade-offs and things like that. But that's also a good way to actually grow within the company itself.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that is really helpful, because it's like, it can look like, well, that's a lot of process, but it makes a lot of sense that like there would be so much thrash if you're revisiting decisions and checking alignment
Right.
every week or even every month. So quarterly is kind of the cadence in which it's like, hey, we're just going to do that alignment check. It's also the opportunity, if there's something new that an engineer wants to bring to the table, those are those opportunities.
Right.
But then weekly, monthly is really just, you were talking about, like, are there blockers? Like, what's in the way? It's just that, how are we doing?
Exactly.
Type of check-in.
Yep.
Okay. And then you talked about kind of the operating model to maximize time for innovation. I want to come back to that one a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit more about, like, what do you mean by that? What did that look like before? What does that look like now?
Yeah, so this is something that we are currently still working on, so I wanted to just preface with that. So, an operating model for a company like us, for a group like ours, is different than for a different context. So, I think the context is extremely important here.
Mhm.
So, I'll give you more specifics for our group itself, which is, again, we have customers from 14 years ago
Mhm.
that we want to continue supporting. And I think that is something that we call as trust. Trust is really making sure that our existing customers with our existing features do not regress. It is critically important, and it is our first priority always. So that's one dimension. Another dimension is, talked a little bit about tech debt and evolution of systems and things like that. Because what was the latest technology 10 years ago no longer is. Like, I'll give you an example of a front end initiative that we took on 2 years ago. We started modernizing our front end on React, and that was a pretty big lift. That we have. We are halfway through there, and that continues to be a big, uh, one of the big themes that we are actually continuing on, right? Similarly, there are new opportunities that we have come across as well. Like, for example, PagerDuty is currently going through FedRAMP authorization, and that opens up new doors. Also, it comes up with new constraints. We have to operate things in a certain way and things like that. That requires fundamental architectural changes as well. So that we had to do in addition to the other 2 3 buckets of work that I was talking earlier, right? And then we are in this, uh, PagerDuty is a multi-product operations cloud,
Mhm.
um, platform that we give for our customers, which means there are different aspects of our product and platform that different cohorts of customers use it in different ways. But we have to ensure that all the products, all the customer cohort, gets a consistent, experience across all the different surfaces. Which means what happens is one part of the product has to make sure that their other part of the product works seamlessly. So that's really where the dependencies come into picture, and Conway's laws and other things comes into picture. So how do you combat Conway's law is another angle that we have to think through anytime we touch a new feature. So this is just the small set of things that we have to do even before we think about any net new feature innovation or net new feature that we want to build on, right? So how do you now take all of these things? This on the existing product feature sets, right? Like last year we came across Gen AI, and we had to immediately pivot towards that. So nobody had planned for it at the beginning of the year. So yet we immediately made a pivot and actually shipped a couple of features that our customers are using today. So we had to carve capacity out of our previously committed feature set to really make room for things like that as well.
Mhm.
So now you have like 6 7 buckets of things that we have to continuously move forward with the same similar set of resource capacity that we had, right? So how do we do that is really one of the kind of cornerstones of the operating model. Like, that's where we go back and say, okay, here are the different buckets of things that we have to do. And we could start off with like some broad categories, like, okay, sustainability and tech debt, 40%, 30% of our capacity goes there, and the remaining goes for net new product features. But in that, how do we still break them into the FedRAMP compliance versus like architectural upgrades versus trust? uh, those are the things that varies based on different teams and products and so on. But the way we allocate is by first allocating for trust, then for compliance and things like that, and then whatever remains goes to product. And then that way we are able to like match our resourcing to our prioritization.
Okay. Um, okay. I mean, so we've been chatting for, 40 minutes. Before we close out, are there any sort of final parting thoughts you want to leave with folks in terms of how they navigate this? I think you made a really great point that like context matters a ton, and this is going to look different for different organizations. But you also left some really important kind of high level things to think about in terms of, trust and compliance being something that you sort of allocate for maybe differently and first before you see what you have left for looking at features, and understanding like who are your customers, and even just the idea of, do you have a Conway's law checks and balances in your thinking? It's going to be different for different organizations, but the Conway's law phenomenon is going to be there regardless, unless you're a tiny startup.
Yeah.
So anyways, just, final parting thoughts for folks as they're getting into their year and planning and wanting to make some changes on their team.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the main thing that I would like to say is technology is an enabler for the business, especially in the context of like B2B enterprises, like companies that we are. It is very important to make sure we make decisions based on the business outcomes or expected business outcomes, and essentially use technology as an enabler to drive and make those outcomes happen. So I think, with that, if the business metrics are not clear, if what we are trying to achieve to our customers is not clear, then I think it's just it's just a half goal in that sense. So I would really urge everyone to go back and ask one more questions, like, what does it do to my business? What does it do to my customers? And if the answer for that is like really net positive, and I think that's a good litmus test for you to put more resources, put more energy into your initiatives.
Yeah, and there's something implied in that as well that actually I thought of earlier, and just I had too many other questions and frozen references, of course, to get through. Which was this implied partnership between product and engineering, which I know I've kind of been able to witness from the front row internally, but it was something that popped into my head when you were talking about, you've got to, if you're going to build the wrong thing, that's the kind of biggest form of waste, right? Followed by bugs that make it into production. But it's that's the like, hey, before anyone is writing any code, before anyone is really even trying to make any architectural decisions, like you got to first make sure you're building the right thing.
Yeah.
And that is really like, that is a product job. Like that is your job and product. But if you aren't in alignment between engineering and product, then that becomes really difficult to do. And what you're talking about here in terms of like asking that question of like, what is the impact on the business? Again, like that is something that, really product needs to be in the room for. And it's great to hear you sort of describing how from an engineering perspective, like those are the same questions that need to be top of mind.
Right. Yeah. One thing I'm very honored and lucked out, I would say, is actually many times in my career as well, is like PagerDuty has really some really amazing values. Like customer champion the customer is one of our top values, but running together is another value that really resonates a lot with me. And I've been blessed with like really good product counterparts to run together with. And I think that's a very important aspect to your point, Doreen.
Yeah. Well, and that's, just a great tee up for next month's Valentine's Day, send a heart, if you're in product to your engineering counterparts and vice versa. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Again, just a reminder, we won't have a show next week, but we will be back January 22nd with Nora Jones, and looking forward to hearing more from folks. Chime in, add to the chat. Manu, thank you so much. This has been insightful, and thank you for tolerating all of my frozen references.
That's fun. I love it.
we'll have to work that into some of the visuals for the replay somehow. So,
Thank
um,
you for having me. It was amazing to chat with you.
awesome. Thank you so much. And I see Anand commenting, also hashtag running together. So love it. Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your day. Have an uneventful day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.